Okay, Wandering Winder here to discuss the first batch of previews for Dominion Allies. I have looked at these just to try to understand what they're actually doing, but that's about it. So I haven't really thought too much about how good they are. Whatever, you're going to try to get as close as unvarnished, whatever raw opinions as we can here. So the first three cards, let's look at them. They have this extra type, a liaison. Um, Underling plus a card plus an action plus a favor. What's a favor? We'll get to that in a second. Bauble to treasure liaison costs 2. Underling costs 3. Choose two different options, a buy, a money, a favor, and this turn when you gain a card, you may put it onto your deck. Okay. Broker. Trash a card from your hand and choose one, plus a card per coin it costs, or plus an action per coin it costs, or plus a money per coin it costs, or plus a favor per coin it costs. Um, Great. Very hard to evaluate any of these without knowing what favors do for you. So let's try to get to that. Here are 5 allies. I guess in games where you're using allies, no, in games where you have a liaison, then you're using one ally. There's 23 of them, I think. You just randomly pick one, exactly one, and you're using that for the game. And then, yeah, so any game where you have a liaison, you're using an ally, and that ally is going to let you do something with your favors, right? So, yeah. Um, those allies, I guess, did I just say they're going to let you do something with your favors? Wow, I really haven't thought about this much. I think I just said that. If I didn't say it, I'm saying it again now. The allies are going to let you do something with your favors. So, what that is apparently changes a lot. The other thing to note, though, is that in games that have allies, or games that have liaisons, I guess, I think that's the same thing. Um, you start with one favor, kind of like the coin token from Baker. You start with one. In games that are using one of these things or any of the other allies, you start with one. Um, you start with one favor. It's going to take me a while to get these new terms down. Anyway, let's look at these. So, Cave Dweller says at the start of your turn, you may spend a favor to discard a card, then draw a card, repeat as desired. I assume, I wish it were a bit clearer, but I assume it'll be clear, like the first time it comes up. I assume that when it says repeat as desired, it means you can repeat spending the favor to discard and then draw. Because otherwise, if you didn't have to spend the favor, if you could just spend the favor once and then repeat the discard and draw as much as you wanted, that would be like pretty busted. Um, in terms of you could just always discard and get to, basically your best possible starting 5 cards. You could also trigger discard effects as much as you wanted. Like, turn 1, I'm going to buy a tunnel. Turn 2, I'm going to have the gold pile in my deck. So, yeah, I assume that means you're spending a favor to do the discard and then draw a card every time. So you're going to be limited by the number of favors you have. We'll get back to how good that is in a second. I'm just going to try to get through all these. So the next ally, Coastal Haven. When discarding your hand in cleanup, you may spend any number of favors to keep that many cards in your hand. For next turn, you still draw 5. I think that means that you still draw 5 on top of the cards that you kept in hand for next turn, and not that you draw up to 5, including the cards that you kept in hand. I assume it's that you draw 5 more on top of the cards you kept in hand. But again, I wish that were a little bit clearer. Again, I'm sure you play with it once, or you see the detailed rule book. It'll be super, super clear. Um, yeah, next let's go to peaceful. um, at the start of your buy phase, you may spend any number of favors to trash that many cards from your hand. Okay. All right. Um, Plateau Shepherds, when scoring, so when scoring, kind of like a landmark, pair up your favors with cards you have costing 2. I think that means exactly 2. I assume that means exactly 2. For 2 VP per pair. And then League of Bankers, at the start of your. Sorry, I haven't scrolled enough to show this. So this is Plateau Shepherds. And then League of Bankers, at the start of your buy phase, plus a money per 4 favors you have round down. Okay, so let's go back to some of these. It's going to be real hard to evaluate these things, at least the favor part, without knowing exactly which ally you have. So, yeah, I think these are going to just vary wildly. Um, Apart from just, the normal benefit of them. Underling, uh, do nothing cantrips tend to not excite me too much, but depending on what ally you have, this could be very exciting. Bobble, a money and a buy for 2 is not exciting. Think herbalist, although it is a treasure, so not terminal. Um, Getting a favor, hard to say. The top deck, you could take like money and top deck and have it be kind of like tracker. This is a source of plus buy, and it's a basically a non-terminal source of plus buy. So I expect it's going to be picked up for that. Um, you know, think of Ducket to some extent. Probably this is going to be like a little stronger than Ducket on average. I don't expect that the top deck thing. I tend to undervalue that probably, but it can come up some, I'm sure. Um, yeah, might be better than the favor. This is probably like a solid role player. The kind of power level of card that I tend to like. Although again, there are going to be probably some times where it's great because the ally is great. Broker. Now this is probably the most interesting one here, to my mind. Plus a card for money it costs makes it very similar to Apprentice, although you don't have the weird potion trinket text that Apprentice does, which almost never comes up anyway. But Apprentice costs 5. This only costs 4. The bigger thing is probably that Apprentice gives you an action back, which probably makes it stronger than this just for the cards anyway. But this also gives you flexibility, right? If you're getting an action per money at cost, that's in some ways similar to Recruiter, although having to use all those actions this turn certainly is probably quite a bit worse. Getting an action per thing it costs is probably not often going to be a thing you're doing because it's just an unreliable way to get actions. Um, right, you need this early in the turn if you're using any kind of terminal to draw. If you're not using a terminal to draw, then I guess it might be okay, but you still need something expensive if you're trying to play a lot of terminals. So I'm sure it will come up at points, but I doubt that that's going to be the play that you're, getting the broker for in many circumstances. However, situationally, you open this thing and another terminal, and you still get to trash your estate when you draw them together or something. So that's probably worth noting. Opening this is probably also interesting. If you can hit it within a estate, then it's like opening priest. If you don't hit it with an estate, then it's much sadder because you're just trashing a copper. So it's got a little bit of that Salvager vibe. It was very similar to Salvager in that way, I guess. But you can also draw cards off it, which is probably a little bit better than taking the 2 money. So, yeah, I don't know. And then the favor thing, again, it's going to be hard to know. Again, I expect this to be a solid role player. It's worth noting that in contrast to Salvager or the other remodels, you can't mill quite as easily with this because you don't get plus buy either. The flexibility, I expect this card will often be pretty good to get like one copy of. Probably you're not going to want to load up on them too often because you lack cards or you lack actions to do this to be your draw thing very much, and you lack buys to right. I don't know. It doesn't give you gains like some of the other stuff. So it is a little bit closer to a thinner than some of the other trash for benefit stuff. But anyway, still probably a solid card you're going to pick up a reasonable amount of the time. If we look at the allies, yeah, assuming I'm right on this and you have to spend a favor every time, this is probably nice, but not something to go too out of your way for getting favors for all that often. It has the synergy with the discard stuff, Village Green, Faithful Hound, kind of Faithful Hound. Yeah, Faithful Hound. Tunnel to a small extent. So watch out for those. Um, on the opening, if you hit 4-3, you can, take a 60% chance to hit 5 on turn 1 by discarding the estate then and there. And if you hit 5, you're going to, because you start with a favor, right? If you hit 5, then you have a small chance of playing your 5 on turn 2. So just the opening thing seems very powerful to me. Accumulating additional favors for it, uh, ugh, how good is that? I don't know. I mean, the discard for benefit strategies, and then other than that, it's some kind of reliability, sort of like City Gate. Probably a bit more reliable than City Gate, uh, both because you can use it repeatedly if desired, if you have some more favors. But there is some maximum amount of reliability that it can give you. It's never going to be tons and tons of reliability. Um, this could be one of them to get the cantrip over a small number. I don't think you're going to want to go crazy getting a ton of allies for this card very often. If somehow they're free, getting a ton of allies, getting a ton of favors, I guess. Again, haven't really learned the terms yet. Yeah, anyway, I think the opening is probably the case where I'm most interested in this, although also write the discard synergies. Coastal Haven, blah, blah, blah. Assuming that I'm getting this right, where you get to keep the cards as well as draw 5 more, that is a powerful effect because you're effectively turning each favor into drawing another card next turn on top of potentially, mitigating some terminal collision and stuff. Um, cards in hand for next turn. Keep in mind that this is going to let you open with a 5 on 3-4, just like Save will. Um, assuming that that's the right interpretation. If that's the wrong interpretation and the cards you're saving count towards your limit of 5, um, then this is just a lot weaker of an effect, and it's something you're basically just going to use very sparingly to deal with terminal collision or a slight scheme effect where you have a little bit of overdraw, but um, yeah, not something I'd be enthused about in that case. But assuming I'm right, then yeah, if there's a reasonable way to get a bunch of favors, this, if you're getting 3 favors a turn, this draws you 3 cards a turn basically. If you have, 3 green cards or 3 cards you're saving across, that's quite strong. I don't know how reasonable it's going to be to get that many favors, but it could be a thing where, it kind of turns the underling into a lab, right? Or maybe more apt to say a caravan. So yeah, this one looks pretty good to me. Peaceful Cult. What is this again? Oh, trashing things from your hand. Yeah, again, something really strong on the opening. You just get to trash an estate right away, turn one or turn two. It probably doesn't really matter, which is a super strong effect, just even if you just use it that once. It's probably not something that you want to go out of your way to pick up a lot more um, favor gainer things for. But again, just like one underling is kind of like a junk dealer that doesn't give you a money then, which is pretty strong. But I don't think you, again, want to pick up just oodles and oodles of favors just for peaceful cult, because at some point you've trashed all the stuff out of your deck, and unless the card stops giving you favors and starts giving you other stuff instead, after you're out of the junk, then this isn't really going to do much. But I guess with something like broker or bauble, where they are modal and can give you something else besides the favor, you broker an estate to get two favors, and then in that same buy phase you trash two coppers, and suddenly you've thinned really fast. So yeah, this for modal things can do early, and then you can also just trash your estates right away. The Plateau Shepherd, yeah, this is kind of like super pasture, I guess, right? Estates are now worth duchies, more or less, for every favor you have. And then if there's other two cost cards, they're also worth a bunch of points. So lackeys or something, supplies, whatever two cost that is spammable. Uh, this is going to be super dependent as well. Um, and yeah, once you have enough favors that you're never going to get that many more two costs, it doesn't do much for you. I guess these are all going to be super dependent. The last one, I don't know that there's much to say about this, except it adds a whole bunch of points to a board, so keep that in mind. But yeah, the last one, League of Bankers, the start of your buy phase, you get one money per four favors you have round down. Notice that you're not spending the favors here, so you just continue to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, which seems super powerful to me. Except I don't know how good of a rate one money for four favors is. It's going to take you a while to get that many favors, perhaps. If you can, then it's just a ton of money that you don't need a deck for, right? It's you have played a whole bunch of, well, it's kind of like the key, right? Four favors is the key. Eight favors is twice the key. At the start of your buy phase, probably also has some tricks you can do with Villa. So if you have 16 and cavalry, right? If you have 16 favors, you can just empty either of those stacks, because those effectively don't cost a buy, and you get back to the buy phase. I don't know if you want to do that very often, but I guess there's some slight combo. But I think the bigger thing is just how quickly can you accumulate the favors to use that as all of your economy, all of the money at least. You don't get buys. But if you can get, 12 favors pretty fast, that's three money a turn. You can, you could start buying whatever a province every turn off that fairly quickly. I think the issue is just that it's probably not going to be that easy to get four favors. Four favors seems like kind of a lot, right? If we think about underling, we're playing this once a shuffle. Every shuffle we get one. It's going to take four shuffles to get to having, or it's going to take three shuffles because you start with one to get to having your first money proc there. If you're getting multiple underlings, then I guess it's a little better, right? Let's say if you just go straight underling League of Bankers, you're gonna get two underlings on turn one. Hopefully you play them. Probably you play them both on your second shuffle. Your deck isn't getting any bigger, so you can probably play them all every shuffle or close to it. So turns 3 and 4, you're not getting any extra money. Turn 5 or so, you start getting a little extra money. Turns 5, 6, you're going to be able to play four more of these. Uh, Turn 7, 8, you got to play six more. So after turn 8, you're going to have played 1, 2, 6, 12. So you're gonna have three procs of this. So you're going to be making three extra money a turn, or so after turn 8. which is still not enough because you've only gotten these things to really be able to province almost ever. So it's going to be after turn 10, right? You're getting like 5 procs of this that you can start provincing reliably. But I guess even at that point, right? Turn 10, you can buy a province every turn 10, 11, 12, 13. You could do worse than that in money. And with some thinning, yeah, I don't know. This seems really strong if you can really ramp up the favors because you don't have to spend them, but it's going to be real dependent on that. But apart from all of this favor ally stuff, we also have two quote unquote normal cards today. So yeah, I'm going to guess the rest of these preview videos are not going to be so long, but there's a lot of previews at the start. So, Hunter and Skirmisher. Hunter, 5 cost action. Plus an action, reveal the top 3 cards of your deck. From those cards, put an action, a treasure, and a victory card into your hand. Discard the rest. Now, it's not you may, it's you have to, and you've revealed, so you have to. So you can't trigger your tunnel um, your tunnel village green kind of synergies unless you reveal multiple cards of that type. I assume you do this in the order it says. So you put an action into your hand, and if it's an action treasure, like crown, then you can pick the crown for your action, and it'll be gone for your treasure. Or you can pick a different action, and then, yeah, but if it's the only action, you have to pick it as your action, and then you can't pick it as your treasure, I guess, which is probably fine because it's your only action. I don't know. So action, treasure, and a victory card. Yeah, if you can get all three, that's very, very good. If you can reliably get two, then it's a lab with some filtering, right? Where you can't draw 2 actions off of it, which is probably what you most often want to do on a lab. But you get to look a little bit further to see at least one, I guess. And then drawing victory cards is, I mean, it's help. You'd rather draw a victory card than not draw it, but it's not often going to be super powerful. So probably you want to watch out for. Uh, I guess this is probably where the order matters more for, right? If there's a card like Mill, which is an action victory card, if it's your only action, you probably have to take it as the action card, and then um, you won't be able to choose it as your victory card. So if you have a mill and an estate, you probably can't take both of them if the mill is your only action, which would be a little bit sad. I think that's how that works. Again, I'll have to check to make sure. Um, yeah, so, right. If this is drawing you 3 cards, it's very, very good. If it's drawing you 2 cards, it's maybe a little worse than a lab on average. You got to look a little further, but you can't draw 2 actions. I think it is probably mostly worse than a lab on average because your decks tend to be very full of action cards more than whatever else. So, um, yeah, it's probably a little worse than a lab on average, but I like it. I like it a lot. Um, for decks that have the mixed typings, it can be real, real strong. For decks that want to draw treasures, most particularly, and have a decent enough clip of them. So probably mostly we're looking at money decks here, where you have a decent number of actions and a decent number of treasures. And then the biggest thing might still be that you want to have, victory cards that you draw, whether that's because of something like Shepherd, or because they're like action victory cards, or I guess treasure victory cards, um, then then that's going to make it better. But I suspect this is largely worse than a laboratory on average, which just draws you 2 cards, because it can't draw you more than one action. It also can't draw you more than one treasure, which is probably not the biggest, most important issue, but is going to come up sometimes. It's probably best in most decks kind of early in the game where you just get to find your really good cards a bit more often than you would with a lab. But it's kind of worse than hunting party there, probably. Generally worse than hunting party in particular, I would expect. Lastly, we've got Skirmisher. Skirmisher seems to be a peddler, which is an attack, and then has this effect after you play it. This turn, when you gain an attack card, each other player discards down to 3 cards in hand. So it's that militia style attack on gaining an attack card. So, yeah, it's nice to gain an attack card after you've gained a lost city, for instance, because you negate some of the downside of the lost city. But yeah, so the thing with this this attack is how often is it going to trigger, right? Um, and I don't know that it's going to trigger that often, but when it does, it could still be quite potent. I think we're looking at mid game being kind of the important time for it to trigger, turn 5, 6, 7, that type of era, that part of a game, um, where your opponent can't just tank the 2 card discard and say, it doesn't really matter. I have overdraw. I'm drawing everything anyway. But also, they probably don't just have 2 garbage cards in their hand to discard where it's, not going to matter. But that's probably also when this thing does trigger the most often. You have to think about what attack cards are there to gain. And, well, obviously there are more skirmishers you can gain, although that pile's limited. You're both going for it. You're only going to get that attack off, like 3 or 4 times. The attack is strong in slowing your opponent down at that point. But the effect of the peddler is just not that exciting to get in the early game. So I'm going to guess this isn't going to be the early 5 that you get very often, and then later on, it's not that exciting. I don't know. So maybe you're looking at getting other attacks. But part of the problem is what other attacks are you getting, right? If it's a cursing attack, you'd rather just take all the cursing attacks for a bit and not the discard bit. And then, like, if you pick this up after the curses are gone, they probably have curses to discard, or they've already gotten clean by the time you're making them discard attacks. So that's not the most impressive thing. And then most of the other attacks that you might see would be like discard attacks themselves, at which point this is kind of redundant and this effect doesn't. So I don't know. This looks like a discard attack where I'm sure there will be spots for it, but it looks kind of significantly weaker than most of the other, I don't know, attacks that you see. There's also other kinds of attacks, of course, like Fortune Teller or something. Those are just so weak you probably don't really care. Yeah, probably it would come up with, things which are incidentally attacks. Like if I'm getting a werewolf to draw, it's still an attack. If I'm getting an oracle to draw, it's still an attack, or a scrying pool or something. So I guess that's something, but yeah, I think this is mostly like a 5 cost peddler, and I don't know. The upside of this is definitely bigger in some cases than some of the other 5 cost peddlers, and I would expect in general that it's probably still better than something like Treasury, but it's probably closer to something like Treasury than it is to something like Margrave, or even Militia or Ghost Ship or what have you. So yeah, I guess this triggers more than once too. If you played like 3 skirmishers and then you buy another skirmisher, they discard to 3, then they discard to 3 again, then they discard to 3 again, which will probably almost never matter, but I guess it could if they react something, I guess. Just watch out for that to make sure you don't get got by it. Make sure that whatever rule set implementation you're playing with, if you're playing on the client, you understand how that works or whatnot. Yeah, I think this one is probably fairly mediocre. This is also probably not super strong. These Yeah, kind of all of these cards look a little bit on the weaker side, especially compared to the last couple of expansions we've gotten, but not like, oh my gosh, unplayably weak, which has me cautiously optimistic because that tends to be the power band that I like a little bit more. A little bit weaker than the stuff we've been seeing more recently, but also obviously not like Pirate Ship worthless or Harvest just awful or yeah, weak but has its spots and definitely playable sometimes. And I mean, okay, not that weak. You're going to get these sometimes. You're going to get these probably fairly often, um, but they add some texture. These situationally going to be super strong, and particularly like watch out for using your starting favor on turn 1 or 2. Anyway, I've been rambling on for half an hour now. Drambling? That is also not a word, Wandering Winder. Anyway, yeah, tell me what you guys think in the comments. We're going to have more previews, I think, the rest of the week that this video is coming out. So watch for those on later days. And yeah, peace out, and we'll see you guys later. Leave your comments. I will respond, etc., etc., etc. Thanks for watching.